All right, so I have to tell you about this experiment. So there's this thing called learned helplessness. And there was an experiment that was conducted by two guys on dogs. And look, it was horrible for the dogs, like 100%, but we learned something very valuable. So two group of dogs were placed in a cage, and in both of those cages, the dogs were getting shocked, and they both had a button to press so that the shock can actually stop. But in one of those cages, whether the dogs pressed the button or not, the shocking didn't stop. In the second cage, if the dogs pressed the button, the shocking stopped. But then the experimenters released the dogs in a different situation, in a sort of larger cage. And what they did was, in one side of the cage, all of the dogs were getting shocked, but then they observed both of the groups. And what they found was the group that were in the cage, that even if they pressed the button or not, the shocking didn't stop, remained there. And they didn't care about the fact that they were getting shocked. Whereas the other group that would press the button and the shock would stop, ran away from that section of the cage and learned that there was another section that wouldn't shock them. So the experimenters termed this learned helplessness, which describes that if you experience a circumstance over and over again, then you learn to just accept your fate and you think that you cannot simply do anything about it. So in the case of the dogs that didn't move, because they learned that in the first circumstance, whether they got shocked or not, and whether they pressed the button or not, nothing would change, they just accepted their fate. And even though they could change their fate in the second circumstance, they wouldn't do anything about it. Now let's take this to a practical scale and how it applies to us. Now I'm in Lebanon right now, and one of the greatest cases of learned helplessness is all over the country. You see, Lebanon's politics is very, very messy. And though the people have tried over and over again to change the situation, nothing has happened and nothing has changed for decades. And so a sense of learned helplessness is like all over the country, where anyone that you approach and you talk about politics and trying to make change, they tell you nothing can be done. And even though now there are revolutionary movements that are trying to make a change, the people have adopted learned helplessness and they think that nothing will change.